And with that, I'd like to introduce this evening's speaker, Mela Clark. You may have seen her around as part of SVPMA. We're very happy to have her this evening. And take it away, Mela. Oh, you're on mute, which is one of the things of the year. There we go.
It would have been interesting. You would have had to lip read for my entire presentation. See if my slides could stand alone. All right, let's get rocking with this presentation. All right, all set? Everybody can see that, right? Tom, we good to go?
It is popping up. Yep, I can see your desktop with your hiking area, and there's your presentation popping up. Excellent.
Okay. Is it up yet?
Yes, it is.
Full screen.
Yep.
All right. Then my heart can stop pounding. We're good to go. And this is really fun to see all of you, not only the familiar faces from our many years being together for SVPMA, but also some people who aren't usually at these meetings. So welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Rather quickly to begin with, I want to give you just a brief background on how this talk came about, and then show you how that fits exactly for your work, whether you're in law or product management or sales or whatever, HR. Through the years, I've done a ton of presentation skills training and coaching for a large local university. Some of you may have heard of Stanford. They're really wonderful people in this department, and like you, they play a vital role at the university. A couple of years ago, one department asked me if I would create a master class on how to present persuasively in less time without omitting important details. That is not an easy task, and I jumped at the chance because I know how critically important it is for them and for you and for other clients of mine who are like you. Now, your topics may be different when you're presenting than they would be if you were at this university. You're making executive summaries, customer data, product launch, sales pitches, but the stakes are just as high. And the reason there's a picture of this woman holding her microphone here is that I can just picture her trying to persuade her peers to accept her business plan. Probably have a little bit of butterflies in the stomach going on besides. Now, I think that's tricky enough to make sure that these kind of persuasive presentations work. You're dealing with humans, that's always unpredictable. But then, of course, we had this little complication known as coronavirus. And so rallying your audience, which could be difficult anyway, now we were faced with a need to get people to zoom in instead of zone out, because it really is a little different to be looking at people in 1-inch by 2-inch rectangles, sitting at your dining room table or in your bedroom with all the distractions that go on with that. And that's why I want to take just a minute for my only poll tonight, because I'd like to get a reading on some of the issues that you deal with, some of the complications or challenging when you're giving your presentations online. This is a list of 5. I imagine that we could probably make it 15 rather easily, but let's just focus on these 5 for now. Distracted attendees, et cetera, et cetera. Would you please vote for one that is the biggest challenge or the biggest complication when you're making a presentation online?
And if you have choice number 1, distracted attendees, maybe you need to look for the poll window, but there should be a poll window somewhere on one of your screens.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Okay.
Okay, interesting. So as of now, it looks like lack of engagement is the winner of the new microwave oven, and distracted attendees is second, and the limited on body language comes in sort of a different distant third. Okay, I'm not at all surprised, although it's kind of interesting. Each group answers it a little bit differently. Thank you for answering those for me, and I'm going to keep them in mind over the next few minutes because this is exactly where we're heading. Now, I'm going to get out of this. Think I'm pretty clear on the dog in this picture being engaged and not engaged and not distracted, but I really don't have any idea what the owner is doing. And while these may only seem frustrating, really my point for putting these up here is because some of these can crush an otherwise terrific presentation. Yep, it looks like lack of engagement is number one, and distracted attendees are number two, and the rest are kind of a distant third, fourth, and fifth. So I'm going to get out of this. And I do have some ideas for you tonight. I have some recommendations for you, 3, that I think can go a long way. If not 100% solving these problems, I think they can go a long way toward coping with them. And one is to create a brilliant structure for your presentation. Some of you who already know me have probably heard me or seen me write about this top-down approach. Because of our time limitations tonight, I'm only going to give you the heart of that, but I found it to be a truly phenomenal way to get your thoughts together for a presentation. Again, lots of information, persuasive, limited time. Second, whether we like it or not, this body is part of the whole environment and is part of our message. Now, I don't think there is only one way to do this, but boy, I have learned the hard way that it's never a good idea to underestimate the power of nonverbal communication, from eye contact to voice to gestures to interaction. I want to take about 10 seconds and ask you a question here, and just raise your hand in the electronic hand. Does anybody's company or team have any kind of a protocol where you are maybe not required, but asked to keep your camera on during meetings? Could I just take 10 seconds and ask you to enter that? Just raise your hand if you've got any kind of a protocol. Oh, okay. All right. So a few people. Okay. I'll get to that a little bit later on. And then third, the third leg of this stool here, you've got to have the presentation, the structure, you have to deliver it physically. And I'm sure that most of all of you use slides. They are designed to inform, illuminate, and inspire, to capture people's attention. They are not death by spreadsheet or death by PowerPoint, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Before I get into the how-to, starting with the top-down approach, let me give you the situation as I see it, so that we're all focusing on the same thing tonight. When it comes to rallying your audience, I thought I would turn to somebody who I think knows a little something about presentations. Are you all familiar with Chris Anderson, the curator of the TED Talks? I'm sure you've all seen TED Talks. He says in this, there's no way you can give a good talk unless you have something worth talking about. To be honest with you, I never, ever, ever see that as an issue. Everybody I work with is the quality of SVPMA members. And truly, they do have valuable information to communicate. In fact, that may be part of the issue because there's a lot of it. What I want to focus on tonight, this is the situation that I'm focusing on, in addition to the other two, and that is the conceptualizing and framing part of putting together a presentation, so that what you want to say is the most important part of the preparation. You've thought it through. And the reason I think that's so important is it is just really easy to fall into these pitfalls. I mean, we're with all good intentions. We've got a ton of information to communicate, but if it overwhelms people, they feel pushed and they're going to push back. Making assumptions. Do you know any two people who see the same situation exactly the same way? Ask a couple about their recent vacation and you'll have two different perceptions. But it's not a joke, because unless there is mutual understanding, it's going to be very difficult to ever get agreement, to ever persuade, to ever get your recommendation accepted. And third, I'm going to ask this of you now. Does anybody know what churn or churning the waters means? Who would like to guess?
Is it doing too much or trying to make things up, or?
Let me find you. Let's see. You are.
It's Ruth.
Oh, good. I thought I recognized your voice, Ruth.
I can undo me here. Let's see. There we go.
Hello, hello. All right, churning the waters is actually a well-known secret about powerful business executives. It refers, unflatteringly, to people who have great difficulty getting to the point. Their thinking is chaotic. They have to go into every single detail, and they can leave their audience, especially an executive team, overwhelmed and confused. Their thinking might be all over the place. They get so entangled in the details that the purpose and the added value is never explained, or it isn't gotten. This is somebody who can't give you the 3 most important ways to be a terrific product manager. They have to give you 16. They can't give you the 5 biggest investment strategies, best investment strategies for 2022. They have to give you 20. And for people aspiring to be executives, it can be a serious impediment to making it to the boardroom, and it is certainly an impediment to being persuasive. So what I'm about to present is intended to avoid these 3 pitfalls. The top-down approach is, I've been doing this a long time, as Ruth knows, and it is, to me, about the best way of structuring, putting together a presentation that I have ever found. Again, it is a way to give a brilliant structure to your presentation, and the purpose of that is so people understand, to change this, that's in my way, they understand, they agree with, and they act on what you present or what you deliver. It's the way you get your reports, your emails, your slides to make a decisive difference with your audience. And that is true whether you're in person, as those 5 people are, or whether you're online. And I don't know if this fits or not, but it requires a little bit different shift, so that instead of thinking of ourselves as a purveyor of a lot of information, even if it's brilliantly technical, valuable information, it's more thinking of ourselves as a trusted advisor. We know the situation, we've got the information, and we are helping people make the decision so they can act on it. I'll leave that there, but keep it in mind. It starts, it's a hierarchical structure, and it starts with the introduction. I want to go through this, and then I'm going to open it up for a bit of discussion. It's a hierarchical structure, just like that pyramid or triangle, and it allows you to go from the introduction and main message, which should be right up top, but you've got all your supporting arguments and your details underneath. You can dive into the details, but you don't lose sight of the big picture. Another way to look at this, if you are looking at the triangle, is that the main message, which is the only part I'm going over tonight, is that brown part at the top. It's focused. It gets to the point. Everybody is on board, and everybody is communicating about the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that at the beginning everybody agrees, but they're at least on, as they say, the same page. And the main message is the brown. In the middle, you would have your supporting arguments, and then the details are at the blue on the bottom. It does these three things and a lot more for you. It creates a logical and creative storyline. Try this sometime. Print out your slides before you're going into an important presentation and just line them around the periphery of a table. Is your story absolutely crystal clear to everybody? Do you have a good, strong introduction with your introductory slide? Do you have your main message next? And then perhaps an agenda slide? And are your 3 to 5 main points very clearly articulated? It really helps. Another benefit is that you get the important information up out front, because that's when people are listening. I've read about Kristen Graham, who's apparently the communications guru at Amazon, and she says, I will give people 7 seconds to tell me what their main message or main point is. And beyond that, I'm out of there. I think it's a little harsh, but I think people may do it even though we're not aware of it. And then finally, you identify where you're going and why, because people listen better if they know what to look for. How you do this, I'm going to go back to this for just a second, because I'll do it here. This is a little bit counterintuitive for people to start with this main message, especially if you're in the engineering or the science professions. There's almost an irresistible urge to default to a narrative style. But with that, you risk getting bogged down into technical details, all the data, the use cases, and the steps that got you to this point. And if you wait to get to this until half or 3/4 of the way through communicating the importance of your message, you risk 3 things. 1, people become confused. They can feel manipulated, and they're probably going to start peppering you with questions. So what I want to do here is introduce these 3 first steps, and then I'm going to ask you a question and then dig down into each one. This is a very well-known structure or paradigm, and some of you may be familiar with it. It is the basis on which all successful arguments, persuasive arguments, follow. The structure is deceptively simple, but it has tremendous power to lead people from where they are to where you want them to go. And then, as I said earlier, the supporting arguments are underneath. So let me give you an example, and then I'm going to ask you to hypothesize on this. I start by getting agreement on what the situation is, so that we're all thinking along the same lines, as I said before, without making assumptions. And then I'm going to tell people why that's important, because I don't think any of us do anything unless we feel that it's in our best interest. And then third, and only third, I will give people my solution, my recommendation, or how I want them to proceed from there. Now, this is right at the beginning. This could be 3 minutes of a larger presentation, although I like to present it throughout. So here's my hypothetical question for you. Let's say you're working for one of the top Silicon Valley companies. Well, there are a lot of top Silicon Valley companies. Let's say yours is one of them, and you're meeting with, 2, 3, 5 other people on your team. And you've got a big purpose here. What you want to do is recommend your solution to some product development problems is a company-wide initiative to make the product development process a lot smoother. You're going to get together for a couple hours and plan this talk because it's really important. You're going to discuss, you have to come to agreement on what the situation is. You have to come to agreement on why the complication is worth exploring. And then you have to come to agreement on how you want people to proceed your solution or your recommendation. So make this up. In the chat, type in the one that you think your team would spend the most time discussing because it's the most complicated. Just type in whichever one that is. And maybe Tom or Debashish, you can help me keep track of the chat.
So far, I see 2 votes for solution, 3 votes for solution, more 3, 4, 5, 6. One person is voting for the why or the complication, but the vast majority of the chat streaming past is all focused around the solution.
Let's have a few more on here. Let's get about 5 more, or however many people we are.
But one person, yeah, I've got a second vote for the complication,
Which is the why.
which is the why. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will turn this off. There's no right or wrong answer to this, but this is what's been interesting to me in the year and a half that I've been teaching this workshop. These are a little trickier than I expected. Okay, is there anybody brave enough who would say why you think your solution or your recommendation would be the toughest part? Why you think you'd need to spend the most time on that? Anybody like to define that? I just saw a hand raise.
I'll go. This is
Okay.
David.
David.
I think it's just a natural tendency for people to focus in on the solution because that's what we're the most insecure about, that we want to make sure we've got that nailed down. So we're just going to naturally spend as much time and worry and blood and sweat on that when it might not be the right thing as far as presenting the solution. It may be the least important.
Yeah, that's a great point, because oftentimes, well, I told you, David, this recently. I had 2 executives in a workshop in July, so we sat through a 45-minute presentation and we're still not sure what the point is. You know, sometimes I think we are reluctant to commit to this is my recommendation, but if you accept my premise that a lot of our value comes from being a trusted advisor, that's really what people want to hear from us. How about somebody else who put down solution? Anybody else want to help us figure out why you said that?
Yeah, I think we have Alejandro. You have your hand up. Jim, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, Alejandro's has been up a long time. Yeah, there's a natural tendency to go into the solution because that's feels active, it's interesting, it's creative, it's we're going to get to something that makes the customer happy. The problem is that a lot of times people dig into the solution really fast without necessarily thoroughly understanding the problem and get themselves into trouble that way. So it's really important to fall in love with the problem, because the solution may change as the problem evolves, you know, the optimal solution.
Yeah.
So there's a natural tendency to spend a lot of the time on the solution, and there are a lot of details, like what platform do we choose? How do we go about this? Who else do we involve? Do we make or buy? All these kinds of decisions. But without really thoroughly understanding the situation, the problem, there's a lot of risk of coming out with the wrong thing.
Right. And I will say that if you read some of Jim's posts on his LinkedIn page, you will see he is a master at using this whether he knows it or not, a top-down approach or a very logical approach with his blogs. And he and I have talked about that before. They really lay out the issue in a terrific way. Well, Alejandro, oh, good. Okay. Do you want to add a little something to that?
Well, I just want to second what we just heard. Usually the problem is defining the problem. We just tend to jump to a conclusion like, oh, okay, this is what you should do. wait. The problem probably is something else. And we end up solving the wrong thing or expressing the wrong thing because we don't know how to put it in a simple statement. This is the issue. And when you talk to executives, they fundamentally try to get clarity about what is the problem that they need to address.
Spot on. I'm awfully glad we're having this discussion. And I also want to talk about the why, but that's one of the reasons I have become such a huge fan of this. By the way, I'm not going to go into all of this tonight because of timing, but in the 3-hour workshop, I have a worksheet that everybody works through in groups on a particular persuasive issue. And I will say again, this is deceptively simple. It looks easy, but actually when you start digging down, there are a ton of complexities in this. But I think what all three of you have said, better you do it before you get into that meeting or before you write the report, rather than after you've gotten halfway through it and then you have to backtrack. But let me thank you. How about somebody who put down why you thought that would take a lot of brainstorming, a lot of discussing?
Yeah, Michelle or Gwen, we've had a number of folks that, in April.
Let me find you.
Yeah, I can go. This is when the reason I thought people spend a lot of time on the why, because they want to convince the audience of the problem. And I've been in so many presentations where people talk about problems without even discussing the solution.
Just hoping that maybe you will sort of guess at what the solution should be. All right, you're spot on. Was there somebody else that was going to will add a little perspective to this? This is great. Somebody else have a why? Discussing the complication?
So we had April and Michelle, if you care to chime in a little bit. You both answered why as your top choice.
April, do you have any reason for that? I won't put you on the spot if you're not comfortable, but. Can you hear me, April?
Yeah, I think I
Sorry, I'm here.
Good. Excellent.
What's your why?
What my why for the why is that I want to ensure that we all have the same understanding of the why.
Yeah.
If we're not all on the same page about why this is happening, the solution doesn't even matter.
No. Thank you. Okay. And I didn't even pay all of you to say this. But and I'm going to go into this in a little more detail in a minute. Any other comments to this? And then I'll share with you some of my surprises or insights over this past year and a half.
The only other thing that I would add in that I thought was interesting is working with a lot of technical experts, as many of us do in Silicon Valley. Most of the folks in the room think that the hard part of this three-step process, the hard part to figure out is the solution or the technology. And they assume, well, everybody knows what the situation is and everybody knows what the complication is. So we'll spend the time on the part that, the part that's hard to wrap your head around. And so they tend to think, well, everyone already knows the first two. And that's a huge leap of faith on their part that's not always warranted.
And it really is a pitfall. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on those earlier slides, but I see that over and over again, and it happens to all of us. So let me move on from here and go into each of these. I guess to summarize, well, what I want to do is, it looks easy, but it's actually quite complicated. In fact, in terms of the situation, I'm really not trying to get into some nasty political thing here. It's just that we've all seen that we had such confusing information about coronavirus that there was probably absolutely no way we were all going to agree on the solution anyway. And that's all I'll say about that, but it's certainly a glaring example. So here's what I knew about discussing the situation, and I'm going to add what you all have just said, which is that we really need to spend time on this. It's the current state of affairs, it is fact-based, and it is unambiguous. It's not my opinion, it's the fact. The fact is that cybersecurity attacks increased 100% in 2019. That's a fact. Our department used to be 5, now we're down to 3. I live in Palo Alto. We had restaurants open on University Avenue. So in the city council, they were talking about whether to close those or not. Now that's a controversial issue. So the uncontroversial issue is that we need to discuss this. But the third one on there, the reason it's in bold is what did surprise me. You've all hit it right on the nail on the head, because this, you cannot start with controversy over the situation. This has to be something that everybody can buy into. I'll give you one more example and then move on. I was working with some clients who are wealth managers, and this one really good presenter was giving a talk to a group of institutional wealth managers. Well, he was talking about socially conscious investments, and those are controversial. So he had to chunk up to start with a situation that everybody could agree on, which was everybody in this room wants to have a good return on investment for our clients. And then he could get into the details, the why and the how. So that was a surprise. It has to start with something, although what you've added is wonderful, and that is that it really needs to be a deep dive. The complication tends to be the most difficult for people in my experience. It's a crisp, short statement. It's what has changed or become harder. It's the problem, the relevancy. Why is it urgent? Why do I need to listen or act? Or what's the opportunity? Our market share in EMEA is 38%, and we can bump that up. We don't want to leave any business on the table. One of the most striking examples of this in one of my workshops was with a group of medical professionals. They were talking about how a constant complication for them is that patients either don't follow their medication or they don't come in often enough for checkups. And we kind of tiptoed around why they should care, why your patient should care. Finally, one doctor just laid it out there. He said, because you could die. And I happen to have a friend whose brother did die of diabetes because he was following his own self-medication. So that's really important about identifying why there is a complication, a problem, an issue, or an opportunity, but not just from our perspective, from theirs. And that takes a little bit of shifting sometimes. And then third, the solution or the recommendation, as we've discussed. But you can see how these fit together and why they do make a difference. Because if you've done a deep dive into all of the situation, you've done a really deep dive into complication, you probably have a lot of confidence in what you're recommending. What I was surprised about, the original model says just lay it out there. We should lower our prices and increase market share, buy low, sell high. But what seems to work better, I found, is to say, here's our recommendation. And I want to walk through the 3 to the 5 reasons that we say that. And that's when you can go down to the deep dive on that model. So let me stop here and get a few reactions from you to the what, the why, and the how as a way to really nail it with your main message right up front. Just anything that pops into your mind if you feel like it.
One comment here in regards to the amount of time you want and the emphasis between the 3 part of the whole argumentation. And is that I've seen all flavors of people just focusing on the what for too long, and then they don't really emphasize the why or the solution. And other folks who actually go and emphasize more the solution. Those are the two things. So, but how is that we know that? Because they spend a lot of time, they provide more information in each of these phases.
Yeah.
And again, if people really get it at the beginning with the what in that sequence that you presented, they can really quickly move into probably what somebody said here. Well, but is this something that matters? And if you get that one too down, then the solution probably is more fruitful, because clearly people can see from multiple angles and probably get to the end quickly. But it becomes almost like a chain where you solve one, but you don't solve you try to address one and you don't do it well, then there is a cascade effect of bad outcomes. The presentation doesn't go well. You need the first one right, then the second right, and then you can nail it.
You can see why I warned you this is deceptively simple. And I don't know if it comes as a surprise or not, but in the workshop, we do break into groups 2 times and people work on a real issue. And these can get kind of snarly. And what you're saying is there needs to be a balance between these 3. You can't be lopsided in any one. I'm going to have to leave it now. But by the way, on my website and LinkedIn page, there are a couple of articles that take this further with some good links. And so, and plus, Laura Faulkner, are you still on the line? No, she's in Austin, and she has a great, it's Laura Faulkner. She has a great article, How to Change Your Research Reports Today so that Stakeholders Act on Them. And I've got a few more on my website. So take a look at those, and I'm happy to discuss this at a later time. To summarize, and then we'll move into the other 2, I really think this what, why, how, you brought up some sophisticated situations, and I know all of yours are. I know those situations. I actually think this can apply to almost any communication, and I'm going to give you a personal example of the what, why, how. On January 24th, we had a family emergency. This family member was rushed to Stanford Emergency. It was touch and go the whole day. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. But those first 12 hours were harrowing. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because the doctors were wonderful, and they called us about every 3 hours all day. But they kind of churned the waters. And they had every test, and this was 9:45 in the morning, and here was 2 o'clock and 3. All we wanted to know was what's the current condition? And the answer was stable. One word. That's really, okay, that's great. Now, we're not doctors, so you are, so why do you say that? Give us a little more detail. And then our third human question was, how are you going to proceed from here? What's next? We'll perform surgery at 1 o'clock on Monday. So I think you can use this in emails, one-on-ones, blogs, reports, interviews. I had 3 executives in class in July. We're interviewing for a more senior position. You know, that awful question of tell me about yourself when you're interviewing, and certainly conference speeches and others. Information overload is eliminated. Again, not because you have to eliminate any of the details that would be down in the blue, but because you have taken us through step by step. You've clarified the main message up at the top in the brown. You've clarified your 3 to 5 main points that are going to prove it. And then this is a presentation, not necessarily an email. And then you can dig down in your details as much as you want. And audience focus is increased. I'm looking here at engaged and distracted audiences. We're the top 2 on our hit parade, right, to start in terms of complications or frustrations. Well, I think if we are using a template like this, we are automatically keeping people engaged and not distracted, because we're telling them what's in it for them. So I have one final question for you before we move on. 2. Number 1, when you get off this call tonight, here's my call to action. Grab a Post-it note and a Sharpie and write what, why, how on it. Stick it someplace on or near your laptop or your computer and see how many places you can use it over the next 48 hours. But before I leave this section, type into the chat one idea where you think you can use this within the next 48 hours. Email, one-on-one, blog, etc. Just type in a place where you can use this. Emails, team meeting, absolutely. One-on-one with your manager, they will love it. Okay, interviews and email, class lectures, of course, project static, okay. All hands, of course. Interviews. Way to go, April. You can have a good night being very creative. Product pitches, of course. Right. Whether to hire somebody, whether to acquire a company. These all can be formatted in this particular way. Well, thank you for your responses to this. And I'm going to move on to the next part, which unfortunately has to be just as important. And I say unfortunately, because I really wish that how we deliver our messages physically, I really wish they weren't as important as they are. But I know that there is no way we're going to keep people from being distracted or keep them from being unengaged unless we use body language, especially voice, with strength, energy, and impact. But I have another question for you here. The first bullet point, you're already communicating your message before you've said a word. What would you guess? What do you think is the amount of time it takes people to make a judgment about you? Somebody just call that out.
8 seconds.
I think you're being generous. Let's get a couple more.
We've got a number in the chat window.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that most people are saying 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a few seconds, half a second.
Okay. Well, I don't know that there is one answer to that, but I think we do it instantaneously. And there are some research papers that I've read recently that say we have made we've made an impression on people before they're even completely conscious of what that impression is. So that's a lead into this. Also, body language is notorious for betraying our inner emotions. If I answer a call and I say, good evening, Mela speaking, that is a whole different message than if I answer my phone with, good evening, Mela speaking. I'll call you back. Now, I don't really care if people are in their plaid pajamas and striped socks, and I'm not even going to ask you if that's you, but I do really care about how the communication is coming across. So what do you think if I were to present this page to you with communication tactics, that works, well, kind of among colleagues, or, maybe in a conference room, like they may not translate seamlessly to virtual meetings? Let me see how many people just clicked off the call. Granted, I was exaggerating that, but there is a certain amount of willful blindness where we either don't know or we don't choose to know how we're coming across to others. And believe me, when we've got this electronic eye up close and personal, a lot of things can have a big impact on our audiences. So let me try something with you right now. I think you're going to like this. I love it. Check how you're sitting in your chair. And we don't want to be slumping, that gets exhausting, or too stiff. I've seen some senior leaders who look as if they have a rod down their spine. That doesn't work. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Put your tailbone all the way back to the back of your chair, just your tailbone. See that? And everybody do that. Now notice what happens. You're still erect, but you're not stiff, and you're leaning forward maybe an inch or two. This is a great position. You can still gesture, you can still look at the camera, you have some flexibility of movement, and it's not nearly as exhausting as sitting too straight or slumping. Second, do we have any ah, or so people on the call? You don't have to admit it. Anybody have a good tip for what you do if you say ah all the time? That's legal.
Go to Toastmasters.
Good. Who said that?
Darlene.
Darlene.
Okay, great. That is good. Okay, and the point with that is first you have to be aware of it. A lot of people simply aren't. Mine was so when I gave a talk to an advanced Toastmasters group, instead of giving me a round of applause, they counted the number of times I said so, and I've never forgotten it. Best way, take a breath, pause, get comfortable, record yourself, speak before a safe group like Toastmasters, because first you have to be aware of it. You can't be blind to it. I also have a post on my LinkedIn page about filler words, and this was new to me about a year ago. There are other words you can use, so you might want to check that out too. Let's talk just a minute about eye contact.
Ayla,
Yes.
before we move off of the Zoom now has a closed captioning feature in it. If the meeting moderator enables it. So you can actually use that to record the live discussion, and it'll capture all those things that your Toastmasters would capture for you, your ums, your ohs, et cetera. And you can read a transcript of your very own foibles.
I did that the other day after the talk on Monday, and I was, oh my gosh. Great, yes, great. So I think it's automatic with the camera, isn't it, when you record it as we're recording tonight? Yeah, but that's what I mean by willful blindness. First, you have to know that it's a problem, and it may not be a problem for us, but it really is a problem for listeners. It gets very annoying to hear that, or the stumbling, or the voice rise at the ends of sentences, or sometimes there's just a lot of mumbling going on. And some people have beautiful accents, but if I don't open my mouth, it's really impossible to hear what I'm saying. And that we can control. We can't control if somebody's dog sitting on their lap is going to start barking, but we can certainly learn for ourselves. But let me go back to eye contact. Would you put your hand out so that you are touching your computer screen, whether it's a laptop or a... Okay. Rule of thumb is you should be about 1 arm's length back from the screen. Please, we don't want to look up your nose. Really, we don't. And if we're halfway across the room, I'm looking more at your room than I am at you, and we need that connection with you. So I actually have to monitor myself. I just do not like looking in that black hole. So I put this little sticker on it when I remember, this little orange thing which is falling off. And that at least reminds me to look at the camera. The risk, if you've got a bunch of screens in your office, it's so tempting to be looking up at those screens or over at the screens, but you're leaving us out if you're doing that. The next thing since you can all see yourselves, or make sure you can see yourselves, as a matter of fact. Look how, if you've got a laptop, you can do this. If you're on another one, maybe you can't. You know, we don't want to look at your ceiling, especially a fan up there that can just make you kind of seasick. And so if you can get yourself so that you are almost filling the whole screen, I'm looking at Tom and Jim and me, and that's the position that we should be in. That's more of us. We're more important than the wall or the background. What was I going to say about that? The eye contact. All right. So I think that was all I wanted to say about the eye contact. But let's talk a little bit about facial expression. How do you react to the picture on the left versus the picture on the right? By the way, Jim has a wonderful post on this on LinkedIn. It's about interviewing, but the concepts are the same. How do you like the black screen on the right? Now, I'm not trying to force anybody to do that tonight, but I just want to bring up what all the research is showing now. You know, we are hardwired to interpret faces and body language. And actually that was on the list. Limited body language did come up, I think, at 12%. But at least like that woman on the screen, we could see most of her. She's filling the screen, she's centered, and there's nothing distracting in her background. You know, we can get a lot of interpretation and body language and social interaction with that. The black screen, we really do feel the absence of faces. It's still not quite the same as if you're in the same room, but you could pretty much get a sense of how she feels. And you could do the other way around too. Oh, I guess what I was going to say is be sure that there's enough light on the front of you. And that's what I was going to say about your camera. I've got my laptop on 5 books so that the camera is just about eye level. And that's the best way to do it. Are there any comment? Oh, I need to do one more thing, and that is about voice. Probably one of the most important parts of keeping audiences engaged. So put your tailbone back against the chair. See, your torso is forward just a little bit, so you look more engaged and engaging. And this is a very important instrument period, but also when we're online. And of course, fundamental to having a powerful voice, strength, and impact is getting enough oxygen in our lungs. So I'm going to do a couple of inhale, exhale exercises. I know all of you have done these, probably some yoga experts in here, but we may completely forget about this when we're under pressure giving an important presentation to your senior executive team. So I'm going to do some inhales, exhales, just to focus on the lungs and the breathing. So I'm going to do it on a count of 2. Everybody inhale, 1, 2, hold it, 1, 2, and exhale, 1, 2. Now let's do it again. Inhale, 1, 2, hold it, exhale, 1, 2. Now move your shoulders just a little bit. Doesn't that feel good? Sometimes I feel I'm a pretzel by the end of the day. Also, there's some really good jaw exercises. This is a very strong muscle. Be sure that hinge is warmed up. The tongue, you have to get that going. I think I've found that because I don't talk as much since I'm not in person, I'm kind of stumbling over some of my words. So warm up this instrument because it is how you project. You are a very important part of the physical part is important. So are there any comments about any of the nonverbals, the delivery skills.
I thought the lighting one was interesting because I did have one colleague that we were accusing of being in the witness protection program because there was a giant window with sun streaming in behind, and no matter how much light was in front of the laptop, it wasn't enough to overcome the light behind them.
Yeah, and that's why this is really a good picture. The light is coming in. I, of course, you need to have something at night. So I've got a bunch of lights in front of me. But again, we started right off with distracted attendees, lack of engagement, and part of it comes from all of this. So run a comb through your hair, put on a clean t-shirt, and that's all you need. And then you're really part of the program. So any other comments? We've got the top-down approach. We've got the delivery skills, and there's one more that I think ties this up as some, maybe I'll say coping strategies that we can use to do as good a job as we can to keep people with us. Visual thinking, I mean, we are a very visual society, period. And as I said at the beginning, slides can inform, illuminate, and inspire or confuse. And we bring ideas to life and they can connect with an audience. I'm sure you can all think of one on your own. For some reason, seeing little Queen Elizabeth in Westminster Abbey when Prince Philip died, this little tiny queen, in that huge, majestic cathedral church, I will remember that visual image for a long time. For you especially, simplifying complex data can speed up decision making, and we talked about the solution. This can help get people to a solution. I don't know if our form factor guest is still on the line, but I mean, they manufacture probe cards to test silicon chips. I mean, this stuff is, you can't even see it with a naked eye. So it's very complex, as is, I'm not sure if anybody's here from Proofpoint, but all of this is really complicated stuff. And then you really do want to grab people's attentions, not in a phony way, but if they're not paying attention, what are your chances of getting them to act? Probably not much. Now, we all know, I really hesitated to show you this slide because of all that's gone on with Afghanistan this past couple of weeks, but please don't take it in any political sense. It's just a very famous visual, and the caption in all the newspapers when this came out about 5 or 6 years ago was, when we can read this slide, when we can understand this slide, we will have won the war. And I want to neutralize anything political about it. I just want to say that, too much is confusing. Less is really more. And to go take a quick spin through these 4 areas, I've got a few examples, and then I'm going to wrap up and tie it all together. And I hope you'll have some questions and we can discuss this further. Number 1, I use this slide in my other workshop on managing difficult questions. I don't think it takes anybody, it doesn't take anybody with your brain power to figure out what's at stake here. I mean, when we've got the big guys pounding us with difficult questions, isn't it real easy to feel like that grasshopper it's about to be eaten for lunch? So I think a slide needs to communicate as quickly as possible what's at stake and why. You all have a lot of data and information to communicate, but every slide should really have one overarching message or takeaway. The more messages on it, the less people are going to remember and get it. Here's another one that passes what they jokingly refer, I think this is Nancy Duarte says, can it pass the glance test? Do you get this really quickly? I use this when I'm talking about how to get your message to stand out. I think I don't have to say much of anything to get the message that we're talking about a yellow umbrella here, so you don't get lost in a sea of black ones. The 3-second rule, anybody heard that? Can your viewers get your slide in 3 seconds or less? Because these kind of slides, and I know you can't use these a lot, it just doesn't fit for your presentations, but they deliver the full punch of meaning while keeping the attention on you, the speaker. So we are dependent on your wisdom to help us understand, although these are very, this is one message. Clutter. How about the slide on the upper left? What do you think of that? What's your reaction?
Busy.
It's very busy. It is all competing for your attention. I don't know why you would need the bicyclers anyway, but they're blurry. The bar charts are 3-dimensional, which they should not be. And they're all competing for your attention. The emphasis is on multiple things, which creates tension, which is absolutely exhausting. How about the one on the lower right? It doesn't take any time to see the main point. 5,000 bikes, and you got it 2 ways: white, bold, and the red bar. And then you can add as much value to that as you need to. How about the one on the upper left? Where do your eyes land first on this one?
The sushi.
On the top left.
Kind of sort of the bars, but there's a tension. It keeps jumping around.
The red bars. Okay. I always go to the man first, the human. How about somebody else? Where did your eyes go first?
On the top one, or the overall, the whole?
The upper left slide.
I don't know. I think that mess on the right.
And I won't mention any names, but I actually have a terrific client, and they used to have slides like this, and it's indecipherable. So again, you don't want people's eyes flying all over a slide. And the one on the lower right with the sushi, or the obesity slide, it's preserving the details. You've got the statistics there. You've got the main point, which stands out, and you can add value to that as needed. The third is color. What does color do? We know it, but I hadn't thought too much about it. It draws you in. In fact, if we were to do a test on this slide, we would probably see what the creator wanted us to see, which would of course be the red bar, before we even realize quite what we're seeing. But color also has an emotional impact. What does red say? Jim, you got on a red shirt. Power, strength, or your favorite university, one or the other. But red does danger, stop signs. Pay attention to this. Oh, look.
Blood bank.
Blood bank?
Yeah.
Well, that's fitting, isn't it? In case they miss the show, it'll never show.
Yeah.
On your shirt. And then, of course, the blue tie. Blue. How many company logos are blue? Because it's stability, calm, trustworthiness. Yellow is lively, it's Easter. In other words, a lot of the impact is coming with some of these small choices. Now, I'm not talking tonight about PowerPoint or Keynote or Pritsy or a lot of other different wonderful apps. I'm just talking about some of these basic principles that keep people engaged. And then finally, this is not a particularly, there's nothing newsworthy about this, but I wanted to end on this one because I think everything I've talked about tonight really is about context. It's structuring the presentation so you've done the heavy lifting with what really is going on here. Why is this important to the people I'm trying to persuade? And then how am I going to be a trusted advisor and advise them to proceed? And I think we can, this doesn't quite fit with body language, but it's a part of it. And even with slides, the reason I wanted to show this very plain one, it's a fine slide. It's got color, it's not too busy. But I also think even with slides, isn't it helpful if the presenter says, what's going on here with this feasibility review? One sentence that gets us all focused on the same thing. And then why it's important for our company or our team right now on this September 15th. And then aren't I much more willing and anxious to listen to these 5 points as you go through them in the rest of the presentation? So I think this can apply to a lot of different communications. And this is where I started, and this is where I'm going to stop almost. And I'd love to take a few questions, either about the top-down approach or the body language or the visuals. And I see some chats.
One thing as you're reading through the chats, I thought was fascinating from a master presenter that I got to chat with for a bit. He had a very specific, almost like a multi-track approach where for stage presentations, this is what's going on with the sound, this is what's going on with the visual of the slides, this is what I'm doing as the speaker, and they were all on different tracks on this graph. And in cases where where it was a very busy slide or there was a lot of visual activity, then he would try to make sure that the sound or the background music was lower and he was more still. And then when it was time to focus on him, there was less on the screen. And the point was that there was always a point of focus for, there's a new slide popped up, 3-second gap while the audience is scanning the slide. Okay, now that's quiet and we're going to make the speaker the center of attention. So he always had a very specific center of attention throughout his presentations. And I thought that was kind of interesting, flipping to a slide and then giving time that they're going to read for 3 to 5 seconds, depending on how much is on there before speaking, and then figuring out what's the center of attention at any moment in a presentation. I thought that was an interesting tool.
What I really find, in addition to what you just said, what I really find interesting is I think looking bigger picture here, it is our responsibility as the presenter to do everything we can to keep people engaged and interested and to help them understand why this is important. And that sounds fabulous, and we've also seen people, I still remember Cisco, John
Chambers,
sat in a chair in the middle of the stage and delivered his State of the Union address. It didn't go over very well, but I mean, it was minimal and it had the audience in mind. Okay, good. What else? Are you now all, I'm sure many of you are quite qualified to go out and give TED Talks already, but anything tonight reminded you of what you want to include in your next TED Talk? No,
yeah, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about, I know this is not the, this is maybe getting a little outside of what you were talking about, but talk a little bit about the intro and how does that filter into the, what, why, and how to differentiate that?
That is a very interesting question. And I always notice that when I present it. Number one, I think you should think through your introduction and conclusion as carefully as you think through anything else. How many cover slides have you seen? I mean, one of my favorite was an arm sticking up in the end, and this was a big company-wide initiative. And I finally asked, why is that arm sticking up there? And the person said, I don't know.
Whoops.
I always use the acronym GET ATTENTION, obtain credibility, AL, whatever the A is, and then lead into the presentation. So I see the introduction as a way to get your audience started on board. Sometimes it could be a story, sometimes it's just referencing what your topic is. And then then or you could start with your what and your why and your how, which I forgot to mention is what I have done all evening. I started with here's the situation, and there was the woman on the slide. And then I said, here's the complication. Zoom in instead of zone out. And I carried that into the next one when we did the poll. And then I gave you my solution or my recommendation, which were my 3 key sections. And I've done the same thing on each of those 3 sections. I am a nut job with this stuff. I love it.
That's awesome.
Thank you for asking.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments? Or do you have any resources? We've kind of held off on that.
And by the way, I've posted, as Mela has been mentioning different things on her website and whatnot, I've been posting that in the chat window as we go. So in case any of you were saying, wait, I didn't catch that website, if you scroll through the chat window, you'll find some of the links.
And we didn't even plan this.
There we go.
That is my website, very cleverly named. And I'm fine with, if you have a question regarding how this would be useful to you, please, you're welcome to send me an email. And then my LinkedIn page is just Mela Clark. And I have a lot of posts on there.
Jim also posted a set of vocal tips from NPR announcers. And I've always found if you want to learn audio, they're masters at capturing attention just with sound because there is no visual involved. And so there's a great book on interviewing that's written by a couple of the NPR folks that are known.
Great, I see that. Yeah. Well, again, we may not think about it, but the impact is huge. And that could be another 3 presentations is just voice. But that's one of the advantages, as we talked about earlier, of videotaping yourself, because you can look away and hear yourself, or just, use your phone. And it's really embarrassing, but it's good.
See, the other thing might be interesting to comment on a little bit. One of the things I find people give short shrift to is rehearsing. So many people will turn around and they're running low on sleep and they'll run into the room and say, okay, here's a presentation. It's the approval for a huge engineering project. And it's very obvious this is the first time they run through it. And it's the critical approval in front of the executive vice president. And I'm thinking, couldn't you, that would have been much better. You would have caught things are 3 or 4 times better if you run through them once or twice ahead of time.
I mean, it's a quantum leap. And the last time you want to rehearse and realize that you've got some holes in your argument is when you're standing in front of your executives or an important customer or any place else. One thing I do like, I'm going to say 2 contradictory things. The what, why, how paradigm is very easy to remember. So, that's the good news. I can at least poke myself and say, I'm just about to dial in. What's my what, what's my why, and what's my how? But always things are uncovered that should be covered in rehearsal, so we don't shoot ourselves in the foot when we actually get into the presentation. Yeah.
I was also just going to comment, you made me think as you were talking, Mela, about, recognizing who is your audience, because the level that, your why might be the same, but the level of the audience, where are they in that, either the hierarchy of the organization, or if there was a customer, it might be different. Some of the content might be the same, but might be a little different approach. So it's helpful what you were telling us.
No, you're absolutely right. And we've all been in those situations where, oh my gosh, I'm drowning up here. And that is in in a professional way, very personal. And I mentioned earlier this big initiative. You know, if I were spearheading that, there's a certain interests that exist in finance that may not be the same as marketing, that are not going to be the same as human resources, that are not necessarily going to be the same as engineering or quality assurance. You know, so what you all are reinforcing is you really need to dig into this stuff first, and it pays up off in the long run. Okay. Anything else?
I would say that was a very interesting comment on the levels. I've just gone through the same presentation 3 times, starting with an operations group who's, you know, the level of detail they needed in the why and the how was all around how are we going to build this thing. And then it went up to a finance committee and they could care less how it was built. It was how much is this going to cost and what's the benefit to the end customer. And then up to sales executives. And so it's fascinating to see. We had a longer presentation to the lower part of the organization and then stripped things out or filtered and adjusted as it climbed up and became a 5-minute executive overview by the time it got all the way up the chain. But each one had a different slant on the although the what was clear, the why and the how needed serious adjustment as it was going in front of different audiences.
And you reminded me of 2 points, Tom. One is that how many times have you been in the equivalent of an executive committee meeting and you thought you had 8 or 10 or 12 minutes and other people talk too long, they got peppered with questions. Now, if you get 5, you're lucky. I have a client, I work with the investment team for the, Hewlett Foundation, that's fine to say. And that's a $12 billion fund. They have 8 minutes in their quarterly board meetings to present your part of a $12 billion fund. And almost inevitably, it gets shortened to 5.
Yeah.
So it better have good bones or it's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else? These are very helpful. I know there's a ton of experience that we're sitting on this call tonight, so that's great. Okay, then I'm going to wrap up with another reminder about coming up, our Amp It Up, how to build your personal power and executive presence. Teresa is absolutely fabulous. She's on the East Coast tonight, or she would be here. It's really a great follow-on to this, although her material will be completely different. It's not going to be repetitious at all. It will be on Zoom, and because it's a Saturday and it'll be 2.5 hours, there'll be plenty of time to break into groups and work and discuss and practice these. And then you'll have plenty of time to get more information about this. But this is our October 23rd stakeholder management for product people, the most important skill nobody teaches.
And for those of you that haven't attended a workshop, they're really quite interesting. It beats sitting in front of a television any day. They're very interactive. We have exercises and people go off into breakout rooms and you actually get a chance to apply something. So instead of just hearing about particular concepts, you actually get broken up into groups and everybody's going to go work on things. And so it's very interactive and you actually get a lot more concrete experience out of that as things roll forward. So that's very useful. So with that, if you're all set on that, I was going to say, like, make sure you have your post-it note next to your monitor for the rest of the week or so, exactly what, why, and how. And please do check out the SVPMA website, and we've got information on the workshops that are being posted. So we look forward to seeing some familiar faces on those coming up. And we look forward to seeing you next month or at the workshop in a couple of weeks.
Rock those virtual presentations.
And go feed that cat.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I swear she was an opera singer in a former life, but you know.
All right, wonderful to see all of you. See you
Yeah.
hopefully for the workshop on a Saturday. Good
See
night.
you all soon.